Right. Should be outside of the complex. Didn't know we would use it for that.
That's right. They could include that on the infomercial. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Christian formation time for our adults. Welcome all. Glad to have you here. I don't need to swivel you this time because I don't need to read the book off the computer screen. So here we are. So let me tell you a little bit about what this new series is for the season of Lent. We have a lot of things going on in Lent, so let me first do a little commercial. Yeah, we can shut the door. I got it. You have a giant surgery scar, maybe, you know?
Okay, nothing but slow watch, just checking.
Feel like it's my duty to say something. So a lot of things going on for Lent. Lent is a time where we get intention, right? Where we provide lots of opportunities for study and reflection. So that is the case again. So we have some devotions out there. We have regular large print or just the QR code on the wall. If you want to just do it on your phone or your device, you can just scan that. That's thing one. We have a challenge going on that you'll hear about today, collecting items for Lutheran World Relief personal care kits. It is the youth and their families against everybody else. So during the season of Lent, we'll see who can get the most pieces and who can assemble the most kits. But at Easter breakfast, we'll set up a little assembly line in the back and make it a service project to celebrate the resurrection. We'll give some tangible little bits of new life to folks who need it. That's the second thing. Wednesday nights, soup suppers begin this Wednesday. We're doing this together with All Souls and taking turns providing the food. Reverend Catherine and I have come up with a series for the Lenten services. We'll teach you how to make a prayer table in your home, and each week we'll give you some item or object related to the Passion story to give you a focus for your prayers that week. So we'll start that this Wednesday. And we have a beautiful musical setting for our worship Wednesday nights that I've done many times. A lot of Lutheran congregations use it for these Wednesday night services. It's called Hold an Evening Prayer. And music finally came in after the first shipment was sent to the wrong house. So I'll be ready for that. But this is very family friendly, the meal and the service. And then I know kids kind of like having, and adults too, like having something to collect. So each week you can get your item and bring it home. And then finally, our Sunday prayer time is going to tie in a little bit to our class. I'm calling this Layers of Lent for a couple of reasons. The first thing is we'll be doing prayers each week onto pieces of paper, and those papers will form a cross on the wall behind the pulpit, and each week a new layer will go up and add more complexity to the art, but also show the weight of the things that Jesus is carrying for us on that cross. Related to that is our study. It's called Layers of Lent, Inspiring Stories of Faith. These are stories of martyrs, folks who laid down their lives to uphold their faith. And I'll be sharing with you each week the story of a saint or somebody who was martyred or killed for their faith. And the goal is to get you inspired to start telling some stories too. Now, they don't have to be on that level of the martyrs, but I do want to get folks talking. So I'll do the first part, I'll give the presentation, and then I want to turn it over to storytelling and kind of get everybody in the practice of sharing their faith through stories. That's how evangelism works. And that word martyr comes from a Greek word that is translated as witness. So witnessing, sharing your faith, telling the good news, if you do it to the extreme, could end up in martyrdom. But really, the same thing is at play, is sharing, witnessing to God's good news, God's power and love in your life, God's grace and mercy. So that's the whole big picture. I won't do this every time, folks, but that is your 2023 Lent commercial, all the different opportunities you have during this season to engage God in new and intentional ways. So for today, I went through the whole calendar. In the front of the hymnal, you might notice there's a whole list of commemorations and saints and others. And some of those are martyrs. And I think the total was 22. There's 22, I think 23. There was a new one that didn't make it in there before it was printed. There's 23 martyrs commemorated on our Lutheran church calendar. So I'm going to pick out around 6 of those. If we have time, we'll do some bonus ones. But we've got 6 of those for this season. We're gonna start pretty far back. We're gonna start in the year 202. With the story of Perpetua and Felicity, or Felicitas, depending on the translation. So first question, have you ever heard of Perpetua and Felicitas? Well, good, I could say anything I want. But I wouldn't, that wasn't your, you were not, okay. So,
Didn't know it first.
we're gonna start with this, their saint day, or their commemoration day, I should say, is March 7th, so not too far out. And this is a very dramatic story, so that's why I thought this would be a good one to start with. I remember learning this in history class in seminary, and it stuck with me. It's a very vivid story that we're going to have today. The short version: Vibia Perpetua, a noblewoman, and Felicity, an enslaved woman, her own slave servant, were catechumens at Carthage in northern Africa. So the practice in the early church was that you had to go through a catechumenate. So it's kind of like your confirmation class, your catechism of intentional deep study and getting into the word, since it was very new, it's only a couple of 100 years in. A lot of study and preparation for your baptism. And so these were catechumens. So they, Perpetua and Felicity, along with 3 or 4 other catechumens, had defied the Roman emperor who had forbidden conversion to Christianity. So he wasn't going to deal with the folks who were already Christians, but he was trying to put a stop to the Christians and Jews expanding because they didn't worship the emperor. They refused to. He wanted to put a stop to this. We'll get into the context of that in just a minute. But these catechumens refused to cave to worship the emperor, and gladly, publicly converted to Christianity, and they were put to death in an amphitheater. So if you've heard some of those stories of Romans, killing off Christians, this is one of those. I'm going to give you a little bit of background, a little deeper background from this book. It's The Story of Christianity by Justo Gonzalez. This is volume 1. This is one of the go-to textbooks, I guess you'd say, for Christian history. It's been updated. I have an older version, but this is one of the classics, I guess you'd say, or the stalwarts. So this chapter is called Persecution in the 3rd Century. In the last years of the 2nd century, the church had enjoyed relative peace. The empire was involved in civil wars and in defending its borders against barbarian inroads, and therefore had paid scant attention to Christians. Trajan, a former emperor, his old principle that Christians were to be punished if they refused to worship the emperor and the gods, but that they ought not to be sought out, was still in force. So if they were caught non-compliant, punish them, but otherwise leave them alone. They're a nuisance, right?
Outside out.
Exactly. Therefore, whatever persecution there was local and sporadic. In the 3rd century, things changed. Trajan's policy was still valid, and therefore the threat of local persecution was constant. But over and beyond that, there were new policies that deeply affected the life of the church. The emperors who created and applied these policies were Septimius Severus and Decius. We'll be dealing with Septimius Severus. Early in the 3rd century, the reigning emperor Septimius Severus had managed to put an end to a series of civil wars that had weakened the empire. But even so, it was not easy to govern such a vast and unruly domain. The barbarians who lived beyond the borders of the Rhine and the Danube, so a lot of our ancestors, were a constant threat. Within the empire, there were dissident groups, and there was always the danger that a legion might rebel and name its own emperor, thus precipitating a new civil war. Faced by such difficulties, the emperor felt the need for religious harmony within his territories. Harmony makes it sound much nicer. And thus settled on a policy of promoting syncretism. Syncretism is when you take 2 different religions and kind of blend them together. A really good example of that would have been in the Caribbean, especially Cuba, where there were the kind of local deities and spirits, and then the Catholics came in, and they had all the different saints. So they would say, oh, that one that you're praying to or doing a ritual for now, that's this saint. They're the patron saint of fill in the blank. So let's put those together. That's kind of the example that I've heard. And if you think about it, when you think of Easter or Christmas, it was existing pagan holidays for fertility in the spring or the solstice in the winter. So as the Christian missionaries got to those areas, they said, "Oh, that thing you're celebrating at the the smallest, the shortest day, that's actually when we're that's a perfect example to say how Christ was born and the light was brought into the world that darkness would not overcome." So again, it doesn't take anything away from what we're actually celebrating, but that was the missionary strategy they used to make it make sense to the people in those areas. So in this case, he wanted to do syncretism. He proposed to bring all his subjects together under the worship of Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun, S-U-N, and to subsume under that worship all the various religions and philosophies then current. All gods were to be accepted. Yeah, you get to keep your gods, as long as one acknowledged the sun that reigned above all. It didn't hurt that the emperor's symbol was the sun. Yeah, it did. This policy soon clashed with the seeming obstinacy of two groups that refused to yield to syncretism, Jews and Christians. Septimius Severus then decided to stop the spread of those two religions, and thus outlawed under penalty of death all conversions to Christianity or to Judaism. This was in addition to the still existing threat of Trajan's legislation. And then one more section. The most famous martyrdom of that time is that of Perpetua and Felicitas, which probably took place in 202-203. It is possible that Perpetua and her companions were Montanists, which is a particular sect of Christians. It doesn't matter. In any case, the martyrs were 5 catechumens, that is, 5 people who were preparing to receive baptism. This agrees with what is known of the policies of Septimius Severus. These 5 people, some of whom were in their teens, were charged not with being Christians, but with having been converted recently, and thus disobeying the imperial edict. Think about teenagers when they really get into something, whether it's religion, whether it's Beatlemania, whether it's whatever, the passion that they can bring to it. So this group of 4 or 5 people were really young, really passionate about Christianity, and were willing to go to any lengths to stick to the faith. Not that any other older or younger groups couldn't do that, but I just put yourself in the mind of that particular age and a kind of attachment.
Go to any youth group meeting.
Yeah.
Find out.
Yeah. The heroine of the martyrdom of Saints Perpetua and Felicitas. This was an ancient kind of, wasn't a graphic novel, but it was popular reading. People loved these stories of saints that were martyred. Some of them are far-fetched. You could tell it was like the Pulp Fiction of the day. There's another one with other young women and people martyred that involved ravenous seals and lightning bolts and things like that. So this one, not seals, but wild beasts that you'll hear about. Sort of the stuff maybe you would expect in the Roman stories you've heard before. Okay, but this was based on a real account, and part of what made it very popular and very moving is because a great deal of the text of this martyrdom is placed on the lips of Perpetua from her diary that she wrote while she was imprisoned before she was thrown into the arena. Now you can debate, did she really write it or did somebody else write it? But I can be as skeptical as anybody, but this one feels real when you read it. The tone of it, some of the details that only a young woman would probably be concerned. When Perpetua and her companions were arrested, her father tried to persuade her to save her life by abandoning her faith. She answered that just as everything has a name, and it is useless to try to give it a different name, and I'll read you this passage. She had the name of Christian, and this could not be changed. The judicial process was a long and drawn-out affair, apparently because the authorities hoped to persuade the accused to abandon their faith. Felicitas, who was pregnant when arrested, was afraid that her life would be spared for that reason, or that her martyrdom would be postponed and she wouldn't be able to join her 4 companions. She'd rather give birth soon and die with them than be spared just because she was pregnant. But the martyrdom tells us that her prayers were answered, and that in her 8th month she gave birth to a girl who was then adopted by another Christian woman. Seeing her moan in childbirth, her jailers asked how she expected to be able to face the beasts in the arena. Her answer is typical of the manner in which martyrdom was interpreted. Now my sufferings are only mine, but when I face the beasts, there will be another who will live in me and will suffer for me, since I shall be suffering for him. Get into some of the other details. Martyr stories, as I said, were hugely popular in the very early church because their stories inspired other people to become Christians too. Why would you do this? There must be something special about this. They'd ask questions, they'd learn more, they'd become believers and face the same challenges they did. These folks inspired people. And so they were very popular reading for centuries and centuries. I don't know that they're as popular now, maybe especially among Protestant groups, but among the Catholic Church, saints are still very much a part of the kind of language of the faith. Lutherans and Episcopals and others, we have these commemorations on our calendar, but we don't often as much put a spotlight on them. But we still learn their stories and are still inspired by them. Some of the other slaves and others who were martyred along with Perpetua and Felicity were Revocatus, who was another slave, Saturninus, and Secundulus. Perpetua was a newly married woman of good family and upbringing. She was 22 years old. Her mother and father are still alive. Her brother was also a catechumen, although he's not in this story. She had an infant son at her breast when she was arrested. So this is a nice book. After the New Testament, a reader in early Christianity. So this takes other ancient texts, letters, martyrdoms, and has excerpts or full passages of them with little introductions to each one. So this is nice. I lent mine out one time, never got it back. That's how good it is. So this is actually Liz's copy. Page 82. That's 82 is the page in this book. There we go. Okay. So you have a little bit of the background. Here's a couple of excerpts. The deeds recounted. This is the narrator, I guess. This is before we get to her diary. The deeds recounted about the faith in ancient times were a proof of God's favor and achieved the spiritual strengthening of people as well. And they were set forth in writing precisely that honor might be rendered to God and comfort to people by the recollection of the past through the written word. Should not then more recent examples be set down that contribute equally to both ends? For indeed, these too will one day become ancient and needful for the ages to come, even though in our own day they may enjoy less prestige because of the prior claim of antiquity. Thanks. Let's write these down because they'll be ancient one day, right? I love that. Let those then who would, let me skip ahead. This one. And so, my brethren and little children, that which we have heard and have touched with our hands, we proclaim also to you, so that those of you who were witnesses may recall the glory of the Lord, and those that now learn of it through hearing may have fellowship with the holy martyrs, and through them with the Lord Christ Jesus, to whom belong splendor and honor for all ages. So this connects you to their witness and their story. This is Perpetua. While we were still under arrest, my father, out of love for me, was trying to persuade me to shake my resolution. Father, said I, do you see this vase here, for example? Or water pot or whatever? Yes, I do, said he. And I told him, could it be called by any other name than what it is? And he said, no. Well, so too, I cannot be called anything other than what I am, a Christian. At this, my father was so angered by the word Christian that he moved towards me as though he would pluck my eyes out. But he left it at that and departed, vanquished along with his diabolical arguments. Okay. A few days later, we were lodged in the prison, and I was terrified, as I had never before been in such a dark hole. What a difficult time it was. With the crowd The heat was stifling. Then there was the exhortation of the soldiers, and to crown all, I was tortured with worry for my baby there. Then Tertius and Pomponius, those blessed deacons who tried to take care of us, bribed the soldiers to allow us to go to a better part of the prison to refresh ourselves for a few hours. Everyone then left that dungeon and shifted for himself. I nursed my baby, who was faint from hunger. In my anxiety, I spoke to my mother about the child. I tried to comfort my brother, and I gave the child in their charge. I was in pain because I saw them suffering out of pity for me. These were the trials I had to endure for many days. Then I got permission from my baby to stay with me in prison. At once I recovered my health, relieved as I was of my worry and anxiety over the child. My prison had suddenly become a palace, so that I wanted to be there rather than anywhere else.
What nationality are these, and are they the Romans who are persecuting them?
Yes, Romans are persecuted, but I know I started to and I missed it. This is in Carthage, which was a Greek
Okay.
then Roman city in northern Africa. So they would have been, I want to say, what is current day Algeria? Western Egypt, Eastern Algeria?
When Rome split in two, right? Or is that two different capitals?
Before that,
Before that?
a little bit before that.
The
That-
Romans persecuted.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is all Roman decrees from various Roman emperors. This is before Constantine came around and adopted Christianity.
Tunisia.
What's that?
Tunisia is where it is today.
Oh, Tunisia, farther west, thank you. So Western North Africa, Tunisia, which would be south of what, France?
Italy,
Italy?
right off the coast of Sicilia and Lesbos, this way down.
But still a very Roman city, because the Roman and Greek before it, remember that whole circle of the Mediterranean. It helps that my older kids are in world history, right?
Someone.
A little more current.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Around Tripoli.
Okay. Interspersed with these, she has lots of visions, lots of dreams that give her comfort. One of them is about her brother who died when he was 7 of a face cancer and how worried she was for him. But then in a second vision, she sees that he's okay now and not suffering anymore. She and another have visions recounted of how they would die in the arena. And so they actually, one of them was like, basically, I call leopard. I'm not going to be bitten by any other beast, but a leopard with one bite will kill me. Another one, said, no animal will touch me, I'll die by the sword. So they're like really anxious to follow through with this so that they can stand firm in their faith. So they have various visions. And number 5. A few days later, there was a rumor that we were going to be given a hearing. My father also arrived in the city, worn with worry, and he came to see me with the idea of persuading me. This is one of the big poignant themes just between her and her father. Daughter, he said, have pity on my gray head. Have pity on me, your father. If I deserve to be called your father, if I have favored you above all your brothers, if I have raised you to reach this prime of your life, do not abandon me to be the reproach of others. Think of your brothers, think of your mother and your aunt, think of your child, who will not be able to live once you are gone. Give up your pride, you will destroy all of us. None of us will ever be able to speak freely again if anything happens to you. This was the way my father spoke, out of love for me, kissing my hands and throwing himself down before me. With tears in his eyes, he no longer addressed me as his daughter, but as a woman. I was sorry for my father's sake, because he alone of all my kin would be unhappy to see me suffer. I tried to comfort him, saying, it will all happen in the prisoner's dock as God wills, for you may be sure that we are not left to ourselves, but are all in his power. And he left me in great sorrow. So this isn't just, and they won the day. There's real pain and struggle, and that's especially with their father. The local governor, Hilarianus, passed sentence on all of us. We were condemned to the beasts, and we returned to prison in high spirits. But my baby had got used to being nursed at the breast and to staying with me in prison. So I sent the deacon Pomponius straight away to my father to ask for the baby. But father refused to give him over. She sent him back home while she was in the dock. But as God willed, the baby had no further desire for the breast, nor did I suffer any inflammation. And so I was relieved of any anxiety for my child and of any discomfort in my breasts. I don't think if some random person was writing this in the as a story, they would have included personal details. Um. There's a lot more. Let me just say, I don't want to save time for you all to talk to. So we get into this, and there's Felicitas who, they were gonna just throw the two of them in a net, naked, for the spectacle, for the audience to jeer at them. But Felicitas had just given birth, as we said, at 8 months, and so they said she's still like leaking milk and bloody. And the audience was so disturbed by that they sent him back inside to put clothes on him before they brought him back out to the beasts. They were going to dress them up as Roman gods to act out something, but they refused to do that. Like I was like, no, we're not going to be a part of this worship of the god. So there's all this stuff about what clothes and outfits they're wearing. And then, as we said in the other one, what I am suffering now, Felicitas says, I suffer by myself, but then another will be inside me who will suffer for me, just as I will be suffering for him. She gave birth to the girl, and one of the sisters brought her up as her own daughter. So they marched from the prison to the amphitheater joyfully, as though they were going to heaven with calm faces, trembling, if at all, with joy rather than fear. They were very happy. That the men were sent they sent bears and leopards and things after the men, but they wanted the sex of the animal to match the sex of the victims. So for the two young women, they sent a mad heifer. And so the heifer tossed Perpetua and she fell on her back. Her tunic got ripped, so she was like, oh, I don't want to be immodest, so she's covering herself. She asked for a pin to fasten her untidy hair, for it was not right that a martyr should die with her hair in disorder, lest she might seem to be mourning in her hour of triumph. To have your hair down was a sign of mourning. So she didn't want it to come across as though she was sad. So she's like, hey, could I get something to put my hair up? So she wouldn't be thought, yes, right? And then one more. Shortly after he was thrown unconscious with the rest in the usual spot to have his throat cut, right? So they've been beat up and abused by the animals, grave wounds, but to finish them off, they'll all be killed with a sword. But the mob asked that their bodies be brought out into the open, so that their eyes might be the guilty witnesses of the sword that pierced their flesh. So the martyrs got up and went to the spot of their own accord, as the people wanted them to, and kissing one another, they sealed their martyrdom with the ritual kiss of peace. You think the peace lasts long now? It used to be holy kiss, not handshakes. Imagine that during the pandemic. Okay. The others took the sword in silence and without moving, especially Satyrus, who, being the first to climb the stairway, was the first to die. For once again he was waiting for Perpetua. Perpetua, however, had yet to taste more pain. She screamed as she was struck on a bone. Then she took the trembling hand of the young gladiator and guided it to her throat. It was as though so great a woman, feared as she was by the unclean spirit, could not be dispatched unless she herself were willing. That gives you a taste of what this type of literature is like. Why, as in some ways over the top as it is, why Perpetual and Felicity, a noble woman and a slave, together on equal footing, are still held up today as examples of faith in the face of extreme persecution. They turned the power of this spectacle, right? The spectacle was supposed to, the imprisonment, the abuse, the public ridicule, the execution, it was supposed to be an effort to destroy their credibility and punish them and encourage other people not to do this. And what they did was turn it into an act of evangelism witness that inspired others, including some of their jailers, to join the faith. So, this is public. enthusiastic, compassionate, the way they treat each other, and the compassion she feels for her parents, her child. It's also savvy, the way they kind of manipulate the system to make sure, oh no, we will be out in front, everybody will know what's going on. So, turn it over to you. When I got to seminary, the first thing we had to do was called summer Greek. It was a year's worth of biblical Greek crammed into 6 weeks. Some people called it boot camp Greek or Rambo Greek, something like that. It was really hard. It was very grueling. Uh, Somebody organized an event that was really important and helpful. In the middle of all this, when we're all about, steam coming out of our ears, somebody invited us over to their house for s'mores and lemonade, and we sat around a campfire and told our call stories. What got you to seminary? Where did you feel called by God to enter into these ministries? And so we share these stories. Some of them were very intense, just lost my job, somebody died, I felt, God pushing me down to my knees. Some of them were a little more, provincial. I these gifts. Somebody told me I should be a pastor, so I started to think about all different stories, and it really bound us together. It's still something I remember to this day. All of us tell stories, and when you sit around a table or a campfire or whatever and tell stories, it brings us together. So what I want to practice is telling some stories, particularly some faith stories. I'll give you a prompt each week. But I want you to practice speaking the name of Jesus Christ and telling stories of what God has done so that it becomes as natural as talking about your families. Remember when you said pictures in your wallet, like, hey, look at this. You can do that with church. You can do that with stories from the Bible or stories of faith. Practice it here so it kind of becomes natural. This isn't about proselytizing, right? This isn't about getting people to think the way you think, right? It's a witness. It's also listening to their stories so that you can know what stories to tell to resonate with them. What's going on in their lives? What is God already up to that they could then connect with? It's not about saying, hey, here's what you need to think, here's what you need to believe. It's listening to them so that you know how to respond. Stories are really great ways to do this because it's personal. We treasure the gospel in our hearts and we fail to open our mouths. Right? Lutherans are not known for that part. So we're going to practice faith speaking. A witness does not give a generic report of events, right? If you're a court witness, if you're a witness to the faith, you're not just like, God's nice. Right? It's going to come across better with some specifics, with some personal elements. A witness talks about what they know and what they've seen. So bear witness to why God's story has connected with you and invite others to find connections of their own. And so integrate God talk into the ordinary course of conversation. You don't have to be like, you should come to my church all the time, right? But you can say like, something happened at church, or I was reading this devotion at home, and let it just happen naturally. It's just part of who you are, right? You don't have to cordon that part of yourself off. I know that in our country, faith has become this very private thing. I don't want to intrude. Right? I don't want to bug somebody. There's a middle ground where you can share without making it come across as, conversion. And so we can learn from evangelical folks who talk about God all the time. I've got a cousin who goes to a Baptist church or who went to an Assemblies of God before that. Man, she just drops God in the faith all the time. Yeah, I was praying for them. Okay, so it's possible to do this. And it's possible to do it in a way that still honors our own faith traditions and sounds natural. Right? It doesn't sound forced. Okay, that's my spiel. Okay, here's your prompt. Share a story when something church or faith related was more important or was chosen over against something that wasn't church related. Okay, it doesn't have to be Perpetua and Felicity level, but maybe there was a little social death. Maybe you had to give up some social standing You know, maybe you're a kid, I can't go to the party, I've got a church, whatever, okay, so that's one possible way to tell the story, okay? And then also, why was it more important? And more than just your parents made you, right? Why was it more important? Maybe it's in hindsight, you could see why what it was. If you don't have a story about that, okay, so the first one is choosing something church or faith related over something that wasn't, or share a story about faith and families. Think about Perpetua and her father, both of them and their infants. Where there's love and affection, but also maybe a little bit, you know, I gotta choose this over family right now. So from this story, I want to inspire you to tell stories about a choice you had to make. It's gonna be small, it doesn't have to be profound.
Luther evangelist.
15 minutes. I'm willing to wait you out.
Okay, I was born with Czech Republic today and we came to the west near Frankfurt. And that area were just few Catholics, everyone in the world it was Protestant. So the Protestants always here was after us because we were the small group. We told our parents said the Protestants were Catholics before. Had them talk with their parents. And they did, and they didn't bother them.
Really?
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
That is contrary to the stories you usually hear.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Because people don't want to talk about that stuff. So yeah, just talk to their parents. I love it. Yeah, you were Catholics.
I don't know if this really qualifies exactly, but this has to do with the youth group. And of course, I grew up in the church, my folks, my grandparents, everybody.
Yeah.
But I ran for president of the youth group.
Okay.
And there was another guy that really wasn't in the youth group so much, but ran against it. And he was more popular, so he got it. But instead of being bummed out, I still attended youth group. Well, pretty soon he wasn't attending anywhere, so they needed a new president. I got it.
And you never stopped serving in the church.
No, I can't say that. I haven't always been on the house. Yeah.
Yeah.
Been involved, but yeah, but it was just, you know, it's like. If you don't get bad and do it, you just hang in there. It's like. I guess it was just show me something. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it's me so much, but my wife.
Okay.
For years, my wife suffered in silence because I wouldn't go to church, but she just gave me a good example and never browbeat me and said, "You coming to church?" You know, nothing like that. She wouldn't do that. But so she suffered in silence until I started to go on my own. But she always set a good example, but never really browbeat me about it. Never says, "You better go to church, you're gonna go to hell," that type of thing. She never ever, she just get up every Sunday and go to church and set a good example. Never asked me to go, didn't argue with me or anything, just setting a good example. And that's more so that I see it other than me. I don't think I ever was that type of individual, but because of her, that's why I'm churching now, more so than it was anything that happened to me, that personal experience or anything, which is more or less her example of suffering silently and just said one day it would probably happen. So that was her faith that it would happen, but she never really beat me about it.
Yeah, and she had the choice that she could have just stayed home with you.
Yeah.
But she picked that. Thank you for sharing that. That's. I'll have to. Everybody pat Lois on the back.
She already knows that.
Yeah, I know, but still, that's.
We all know she suffers.
Maybe I'm off with this one. Maybe this is a hard one. A lot of you I know have gone to church. I know Roger's an exception for a long time, cradle to now. Did you ever feel like you had to choose church over something?
Mine is it's kind of goofy, but I think it's planted the seed, the church has to come first. when I was a teenager, you know, a lot of my friends would go out on dates on Sunday night. I was never allowed to do anything on Sunday night except to go to youth group. I mean, nothing else, you know, and so I guess I learned that church was supposed to come first, but, and also family dinners, on my mom's side of the family. Most of them did not go to church, but my mother put her foot down and we won't be there until after church, so. None of the family dinners started until 12:30 or 1 o'clock when we got there, so. You know, church has to come first.
Sometimes people make that choice for you, and then it either sticks or you kind of rebel against it, you know.
Things I've noticed, the people who, maybe I'm wrong, but from my personal experience, people who went to church from day one, baptism on, do it more by rote than by conviction.
Sure.
And they have certain premonitions or certain concepts that were really not thought through, I guess,
Oh, sure.
because they were used to, that's what they've always done.
Unconscious, yeah.
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 So I think people who were converted later sometimes
Oh, yeah.
can be a better Christian than the ones who were born that way.
Yeah.
Because they really have anything going.
Because I think they can also grow slowly. You know, you don't start in kindergarten reading encyclopedias. So I think if it's planted as young, you just, you know, it grows with you and the more you go, the more you're exposed to. And, you know, you never quit learning and your faith grows. I don't think it has to be a lightning bolt thing.
Oh, thank you for basically proving why I'm doing this exercise this week. Because each of you has a different story. Each of you has different experiences. So for you, Donna, it was put into you at a young age. It was reinforced over and over again by the choices that your mom made and the rules she enforced for you.
And when I got married, I married a Lutheran.
Yeah.
And he would, besides all his things, he did outside church, he was in church every Sunday.
So, but that's something that's been a part of your life and important, and it was a gradual thing. And for others, as Roger is saying, they go through the motions without ever reflecting, as you've shared number of times. But for Roger, it was something that came later in life, maybe not as a lightning bolt, but it took a while to get there. That's why it is important not only to share our stories, and that's evangelism, right? Evangelism isn't what we think of with folks knocking on doors or the sandwich boards or whatever, handing out tracts and pamphlets. Evangelism is speaking to the good news of Christ in your life. If you come across just generic, it's not going to do much. But if you come across personal, that's where you make connections. So you also need to have evangelical listening, not just speaking, where you're listening, asking the Holy Spirit to help you listen to others so that you will know. The story about my mom making these choices for me would be really helpful right now for somebody who's struggling to make choices on their own. But maybe that's not their experience. You know what? You could say to somebody, you know, I have a friend at church named Roger, and he told a story about his wife just patiently witnessing, going to church, not forcing him. It really depends on what that person's in the middle of. So you have these stories. That's why I want you to practice them. So you have like a toolbox, or you have that you know, in your spiritual wallet of which one are you going to pull out today. This is what we're going to practice. All right, I want more. We got 10 more minutes, more stories.
I know you mentioned how today people don't talk about their church or, you know, God at work and in a public, you know, more professional setting.
Yeah.
I've kind of, being as ornery as I am, I'll use the term nicely. I kind of make a point of talking about it at work sometimes more than I would have before.
Yeah.
Especially my company's very, I call it left coast, coming to California based. So there's a lot of people who are kind of hands off about it. But once you start sharing, then it's like, oh yeah, I go to this church. Oh yeah, I go to this church, and you kind of share stories. And it's really, there's a group that we just talk about it, and we don't care who's there, and no one else is uncomfortable. And you take at times get questions from people, which, you know, it's a good thing to put out there.
But okay, let me follow up on that. Was that something where you all said, okay, we're gonna organize, we're gonna be, you know, the Christian Witness Association,
No,
the
not at all.
CWA, and we're gonna have this group and we're gonna talk loudly about our faith. You know, Was it something where it happened organically?
Organically, absolutely.
Yeah,
You start, someone just start talking and then
Yeah.
next thing you know, you start trading stories about, this group or that group, or how do they do this, or we do this.
Yeah.
It's just making it part of your life and not trying to separate the two, because if you're a Christian everywhere. Not just on Sunday mornings at church.
it's one of the bbest lines from the story, is Perpetua saying, "You see that vase or water jug or whatever?" He's like, "Yeah, could I call it something else?" He's like, "No, if I'm a Christian, it can't be anything else but there."
And one of the things I did when I was in college, I lived in, I was a friend of mine, folks, and I had a room in their house, and it was in a residential area. And the Seventh-day Adventists and all the, what I called at that time, the Bible thumpers would come to the door, and they thought I lived there. And so they weren't home, so I would, and I was a student of the Bible. I didn't believe in it, but I was a student of the Bible, and I knew more about the Bible than they did. In most cases, they were faith-bound, but they didn't really understand their faith. And when people would come at me with this faith-bound thing.
Yeah.
And I knew I could time up the knots, and when they left, they were human, and I was enjoying myself.
Right,
So
Yeah.
that's the problem. That people who want to profess their faith don't always do their homework, and they try to be very aggressive.
Yeah.
And it turns more people off than it turns them on.
that was the playbook for so long. And the branches of Christianity that used that were very vocal and got a reputation, and that spilled over into other parts of Christianity. And that is one of the reasons why to do what Darren does is not as common.
Right.
Because you don't want to come across like that kind of Christian, where it's a, I'm gonna conquer you, I'm gonna win you over,
It doesn't.
I'm gonna bring you to my side. God has shown you, look at the state of the church right now. That approach didn't work, and that was like the big, I mean, think of Billy Graham, no offense to Billy Graham, but I mean, the big revivals, and you gotta witness your faith, you gotta convert the folks, you gotta help them find salvation, right? Where it was like a numbers game, where it was it's our job to save souls. It is not our job to save souls. It is God's job, the Spirit's job to save souls. Our job is to witness. Now, we don't live in a place, I'll talk about this a little bit in my secretary, we don't live in a place where we are I know some people say Christians are persecuted, but we're not. When you read stories like this, when you read stories about missionaries in China, or I've told stories about this biography I read of a pastor in Ethiopia, there's so many places around the world throughout history, all the way back to 200, all the way back to the first one. The oldest martyr on the list were the holy innocents, the little children around Bethlehem. But really, if you think of the first Christian martyr for being a Christian, it would be Stephen in chapter 7, I think, of Acts, who gets stoned to death, right? So from the year 30-ish, 33 to now, we have plenty of stories of what persecution looks like. Think of the Inquisition. You're a Christian, but you're not doing it right, right? So it's maybe hard to relate to martyr stories when we live in a place where that's really not. I know that there are things that happen in our country of defacing houses of worship. I've seen stuff over the abortion debate, whether people are spray painting it on Catholics for being pro-abortion, or spray painting it on more, left of center Christians for being pro-abortion. I've seen so many things of swastikas put on synagogues. Hate speech was just projected on the Anne Frank house a few weeks ago. Did you read about that? How people have been using projectors to put things on other people's houses. Yeah, they put Nazi hate speech on the Anne Frank house. Right? So it's out there, but not like this. I'm guessing. Let me just ask. Maybe I'm assuming. Has anybody ever been persecuted in a way that felt threatening for being a Christian? Okay, have you ever been pressed in a way that was uncomfortable for being a Christian? Show of hands on that one. Really? So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 folks, and I know you've all shared stories around this table before. Would you be comfortable sharing about it? Or not? No, no pressure.
I'm a retired police officer. I can't tell you the number of times I've been told, leave your religion at home, doesn't belong here.
Really?
Yes,
So. What parts of the religion did you need to leave at home?
basically all of it,
Like compassion?
yes.
Like, don't put yourself
Don't-
in these people's shoes.
Right, don't feel sorry for that person.
Okay,
Don't dig into why they committed
Sure.
the crime. They committed a crime, throw them in jail.
and there's some practicality to that. You kind of need a little bit of separation. But at the same time, they're still human beings, children of God. That's tough.
I knew a lady, she was a police officer as well, and she would always listen to her gospel music
Oh, sure.
on the way to work. And she said she would get to work and they would tell her, you need to not listen to that on the way to work. That's
Really?
not what you need to be listening to. You need to get yourself psyched up to come to work. So, yeah. Because she was like, I think they were afraid that, she said that they were going to, that she wasn't, maybe not do her job like she's supposed to, maybe, because, police officers do at times have to do
Really?
things that people, we don't want them to do, but they have to do it. And, would she be able to do that if she's able, she's listening to gospel music?
So I don't want to put words in y'all's mouths, but would it be something like there's a worry that Christianity would make you too soft,
Yes,
or that your Christian beliefs would make you too soft to do the job?
yes.
Huh.
It wasn't that I was persecuted, but I was made to feel irrelevant,
Okay,
that your religion's irrelevant.
that's the other side.
Yeah.
Okay, it took a little bit. It's time to go, but I think we got it. We kind of got down to it. You might have to dig through some layers to get to these stories, because you can start with, we're doing a service project at church. It makes me feel good. We sang a song that I really like. My kid raised his hand in worship today. Man, was it cute. You should have seen how flustered the pastor got. You can start there, but as you listen, as you do that evangelical listening, as you get to know other people's stories, as you build trust with one another, then you can get to some other ones that are a little harder to get to. And you can say, you know what? I had to find ways to hold on to my faith in a situation where others were pressuring me not to. I had to find ways to say, no, this is important to me, or relevant, even if others saying it's stupid or irrelevant. Not this level, but there's connections. Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the name of the movie. It's been such a long time. It's Courageous.
Greatest Fathers, the police officer, that's a great one. By the Sherwood films.
Yeah, they've got a whole library.
Overcomer is a good one about being Christian all the time. How would you describe yourself as a great
Yeah, and I would just throw it out there. Being Christian all the time is gonna be unique to each of you.
Mhm.
Being Christian all the time doesn't mean sort of that knock on the door and challenge people attitude. But being Christian all the time means you're gonna stick to your beliefs, even when it's hard. And what are the core of Jesus's things? Golden rule, last shall be first, the foot washing, the sheep and the goats thing, right? What you do to the least of these, you do to me. When it comes to living out your faith, that's kind of the core of the gospel. Jesus on the cross saying, hey, Father, forgive them, they don't know what they're doing, or hey, to the thief, you'll be with me in paradise. The lepers, the woman at the well, all of these stories are the core of the gospel. That's what inspired noble women and slaves alike, that in the kingdom of God, you're all on par. So now you know what's coming for the next 5 Sundays. you know, in your prayer and devotions during the week, start opening up the vault. Think of some stories, think of some memories. Each week, I'm gonna bring a new saint to you. And each week, I'm gonna find something in the core of their story that will hopefully open up like we got to today. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for sharing these stories. Thank you, Brad, Tammy. Can I just, yeah. Sorry. Sometimes I look at you and I have another person that looks like that instantly doubt myself. Okay, thank you, Roger. Thank you, Erna. Thank you, Donna. Who else? Darren got in there. Bill. I didn't say your name. What should I talk about? No pressure. No pressure. Because I just said that listening. Let's close with a quick prayer. Gracious God, thank you for this day. Thank you for the stories of those who have inspired us. We're the next couple of weeks going to be lifting up those whose stories are well known. Help us to draw on stories that are only known to us, family members, friends, co-workers, stories from other histories that have inspired us, and open our hearts and our mouths to share them in these classes and in our lives and in our interactions. Whatever we do, help it to be a witness to you. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, everyone. Stop the recording.